Hi, I'm Glenn Rogers, and this is Biblical Insights. This is part number 26 in our study of Jesus' ministry, and the text we're going to be looking at today is Mark chapter 6, beginning with verses 7 through 13. And this section is a section where it discusses Jesus training his apostles. And there's a great deal of information here, lots of very interesting things to discuss. So I want to read the text and then tell you what I'm not going to discuss, and then start our discussion in the direction that I want it to go. And it may surprise you a little bit, but I think it's an important idea that underlies this text. So we're going to be reading, as we always do, from the Simplified New Testament, which is my translation of the New Testament, in Mark chapter 6, beginning with verse 7. Jesus called his 12 apostles together, gave them power and authority over evil spirits, and sent them out to preach. He gave them these instructions: do not take anything with you except a staff, no food, no bag, no money. Do not even take an extra coat with you. Find someone to stay with when you first arrive at a village, and stay with them until you leave. And if a town or village does not welcome you and listen to you, leave that place, shaking the dust off your feet as you go. It will be a statement against them, because they would not listen to the word of God. Following his instructions, Jesus' apostles traveled about, teaching the people that they should turn from their sins and give their lives to God. They drove out demons and healed many sick people. Now, there's lots of interesting stuff in this text. Okay, talks about him giving them power over evil spirits. We could talk about evil spirits and what kind of power you have if you have power over evil spirits. He talks about them healing the sick and what would be involved in that. He told them to go and don't take any extra money or food or anything. Just go and stay with some people and let them take care of you while you're there preaching. Told them that if the village people wouldn't listen, they should leave, and as they did, they should shake the dust off their feet. there's all kinds of interesting stuff here to talk about. And we're not going to talk about any of that. Okay. We can talk about that stuff another time. Some of it I've already talked about. We don't need to talk about it again. But what I want to focus on today is the fact that Jesus was teaching his apostles how to minister and how to be church leaders. And that's where we need to focus our attention, okay? Jesus selected these 12 men from a larger group of disciples and trained them for the job of ministry and leadership when he was no longer going to be there to do that job himself. Okay, he knew there was coming a time when he would be betrayed and crucified, that he would die, that he would raise from the dead, and that he would eventually ascend back to the Father, and that somebody would have to be there to do the job of teaching, to do the job of ministry, to be leaders in the new church. Well, who was going to do that? And why worry about it at that time? Jesus was deep in ministry. Why not just let things play out? And when he was gone, they could figure out who was going to be in charge. And, somebody would. Why not do that? Well, because that would have been foolish, and it would have been ineffective, and the whole thing would have fallen apart. Jesus knew that there had to be somebody in authority, somebody in charge, somebody who knew how to do what needed to be done. And that's the key. Knowing how to do what needs to be done. So we're talking about training for ministry. Okay? Jesus knew he had to train some guys to take over when he was gone. Why? Well, let's think about ministry. Okay, what is ministry? Well, it's a job. It's involvement in spiritual things. It's helping people with their spiritual needs, helping them understand what to do and how to do it to be forgiven of their sins so they can be saved, have a relationship with God. Okay? So it has to do with eternal concerns, and that makes it the most important job there is. All right, now I'm serious when I say that. There is no job more important than the job of ministry. Not even the job of being the President of the United States or whatever it is you are, the Prime Minister of this country or the King of that country or whatever. All right, none of that stuff matters when compared to ministry and doing a job that has to do with the souls of human beings. Ministry is the most important job there is. It's so important that God himself became a human being to engage in ministry, to teach people, to sacrifice himself for the sins of people, but while he was there, to teach people and to train other people how to do the job. That should tell you how important the job is. It is the most important job in the world. That's number one. Number two is it's also the most difficult job in the world. Well, why? What's so hard about ministry? You get with somebody and you tell them you're a sinner and you need to be saved, you need to confess your sins and embrace it. Oh yeah, sure, the telling them part is easy. But to actually do the job of ministry is very, very hard. Why? Why is it hard? Because of the stubbornness and obstinance of people. People are like sheep. They need a shepherd. They need somebody to lead them. Problem is, they don't want to be led. They don't want to submit. They don't want to acknowledge their sin. They don't want to admit that they don't understand, that they don't know, that they need help, and they don't want to follow. Those things are really hard for people to do. Why? Because we're self-determined people. We have free will, and we love having free will. We love the fact that we decide. I decide who and what I'm going to be, who and what I'm going to do. I decide. See, and we like that. I like it. You like it. We all like it. We like being self-determined people. And when somebody stands up and starts saying, but you're deciding badly or poorly, and you need to let God help you, and you need to listen to him and do what he says, we kind of don't like that, right? We don't like that. I mean, think about it. We spend our entire lives as children growing up and, if you admit it, resenting the fact that we have to obey our parents because we want to do what we want to do. And when we get old enough, when we get to be teenagers, we start to rebel against their authority, and we want to do what we want to do. You see? You know I'm right. That's the way life is. That's the way people are. Well, when you're a minister and you're trying to deal with those kind of people who want to do what they want to do, the way they want to do it, it's something of a challenge. It is. And so you're working with these people, and you know you're right, and you know you're teaching them the truth, and you're trying to help them submit to God and develop a relationship with God and let him help them become better people. And you're trying to help this process along, and it is not easy to do. It's hard to do. Now, Jesus understood how hard it was. It was hard for him. I mean, think about it. Think about how ministry went for Jesus. People didn't like what he said. Oh, some people did. Some people thought he was wonderful, but mostly because he healed the sick and he fed the hungry, right? When he actually started teaching them what they needed to know, then they started going, well, wait a minute, I'm not so sure about this. I've never heard this before. I'm not sure he's right. I don't like what he's saying. I don't like the way he's saying it, right? When you read the Gospel of John, one of the things you encounter is how much difficulty Jesus experienced when he was actually really trying to teach the people something that would matter, right? When he was trying to teach them something. They didn't want to hear it, right? And so even for Jesus, ministry was difficult and ministry was challenging because people are stubborn and people are obstinate. But still, it has to be done. Why? Well, because there are souls at stake, souls at risk. Satan wants to destroy people. God wants to save people. And so Jesus knew that when he was gone, he was going to have some men ready to step into the role of leadership and be ministers who could carry on. And they then were going to have to teach others, who would then teach others, who would then teach others, and so forth, generation after generation after generation. There must be leaders. But here's the thing. You can't just go, oh, I think I'm going to be a minister, and go and start doing it. It doesn't work that way. Why not? Because it's too complicated, it's too hard, it's too challenging. There's too much stuff you have to know and understand. You have to have training. You have to be taught. Now, the apostles were just normal guys, intelligent men who had careers. Peter, James, John, and some other, they were fishermen, okay? Not an easy job. They had to know lots of different stuff to be successful fishermen, right? And you have Matthew, who was a tax collector, totally different kind of job, but he had to be pretty smart to do it, pretty capable, right? So they were smart, capable people. Some of them were involved in political concerns, right? Also something that's not easy, something that's very complicated, right? Some of them, we have no idea what their career was before they became disciples and apostles of Jesus. But they were all normal men who had lives, who had jobs, and they were very capable. But they had no training in ministry. They had no training in leadership. And just because Matthew was a very a prosperous and very successful tax collector, didn't mean he could simply step into the role of leadership and be a leader in the church. No, he had to be trained. Just because Peter and Andrew and James and John and others were successful fishermen didn't mean that they could step into the role of ministry and church leaders and be good at that without training. There must be training. Now, why am I making a point of this? Because there are many particular groups of Christians who don't feel like formal Bible training and formal training in ministry are very important. And they think, some guy who's been coming to church for a while who says, well, I'd like to be a minister, that they can just get up and start doing the job without having any training. Now, it's true you have to have actual real-world experience, and so at some point you have to start doing ministry in order to learn how to do ministry effectively. That's true, that's part of it. And what we see in this text is that Jesus is sending out his apostles to get some real-world experience. They need to be the ones out there teaching and having people asking questions and doubting what they're saying. They needed to experience themselves what they saw Jesus experiencing, right? And Jesus understands that, so he sends them out to engage in ministry. And when they come back, then he talks with them and he listens to them and he advises them and helps them learn how to do better what they did, right? It's a process of training, okay? But note, He doesn't select them one day and send them out the next, right? There's some time in there where he's teaching and they're listening and they're learning, and he's utilizing them in small ways, and he's talking to them. And when he's with them and the crowds are gone, then he continues to teach them and help them understand, right? And they're learning. And they're learning a lot before they ever go out and start engaging in actual ministry. And when they come back, he's teaching them more. Their training program was about 3 years long. About 3 years. Now, was it a formal training program where they went to college and they sat in a classroom and they had a syllabus and they read books and they wrote papers and they listened to lectures and No, it wasn't that kind of training. It was on-the-job training, but it was still training where they were learning from a teacher. They would ask questions, and he would answer the questions, and he would challenge them with questions of his own. And they were learning for 3 years before they stepped into the role of a leader, engaging in ministry on their own. Now, I think what it's important for us to understand it is that people today who want to engage in ministry need some sort of formal training, just like the apostles got. Now, when I say formal, I don't mean you have to necessarily go to school and be in a classroom. I mean, that's good, okay? I did that, and I was also a teacher who did that, okay? I taught at seminaries and at colleges where men were studying to be ministers. That's what I did for several years. But even if you're not in that kind of a classroom situation, you still need to have some sort of a training program. You still need to be confronted with all of the things that you're going to be confronted with as a minister, and you need to think through them, and you need to have some responses ready. You need to learn these things before you go out and start trying to do them. Otherwise, you're not going to do them very well. Jesus talked about what happens when the blind leads the blind. What did he say? He said, well, they both can fall into the ditch. What was his point? Well, you can't be a leader if you can't see where you're going. It was an analogy that meant you can't be a leader, a teacher, if you haven't first been led, if you haven't first been taught. I say it this way: you can't be a teacher until you have first been a student. And you can't be a good teacher until you have first been a very good student for a long time. And I know, because I've done it, right? I know what's involved. And if you talk to any older man out there who's been involved in ministry and who's been successful at it, he'll tell you the same thing. It takes a long time to learn. And you have to get a lot of experience before you can engage in effective ministry. So my point today is, if you have ambitions for being a leader in the church, being a minister, that's wonderful. That's great. Jesus wants more ministers and more spiritual leaders. But you have to take the time to get some training. And if you are currently in ministry and a leader, and you have other people who express an interest in that, that's good. Encourage them. But make sure they understand they have to get some training. Just like Jesus' apostles had to be trained. They're going to have to be trained. They just can't just start doing it without any training, without anybody helping them, without any guidance. They have to get some training and get some experience. You need training in the biblical studies. You need to learn how to study the Bible, which means you need to learn something about the languages it was written in, Hebrew and Greek. You need to learn history. You need to learn culture of the ancient world. You need to learn what it was like to live in that time. You need to understand that there are different kinds of literature in the Bible, right? And it requires different kinds of interpretive methodologies. You need to understand something about people how people think and act and behave. You need to understand some basic psychology, is what I'm saying. You need to know how to communicate well with people. You need to study that. There's just so much you have to learn to be an effective leader, to be engaged in effective ministry. It takes a lot of training. So I don't mean to discourage anybody, but I want to encourage you to want to engage in ministry, but understand you have to get some training to do it well. You have to get some education. You have to follow somebody and be a follower before you can be a leader. And you have to be a student before you can be a teacher. So, think about these things for a while, pray about them, and while you're doing that, just in the course of your everyday life, read the Bible, pray, go to church, and may God bless.